I first saw the clock on a rainy Thursday afternoon, tucked away in the back corner of a dusty antiques shop. The place smelled of varnish and old paper, and the air felt heavier than it should have, like the rain outside had somehow seeped into the walls. The shopkeeper was nowhere in sight, and I had been wandering between shelves of forgotten porcelain figurines and stacks of yellowed books when my eyes caught on it. It was a wall clock, larger than any I'd seen in a home, with a dark wooden frame carved into patterns that seemed almost floral, until you looked closer and saw the curves resembled twisting roots. The glass over the face was slightly fogged, and the brass hands were tarnished to a dull greenish gold. But what struck me wasn't its appearance. It was the way the second hand moved. It ticked backwards, not smoothly, like a film reel played in reverse, but in abrupt, deliberate clicks, each one pulling time in the opposite direction. I stood there far too long, waiting for it to falter, to reveal itself as broken, but it kept perfect rhythm, only in reverse. The numbers on the face were ordinary, Roman numerals faded from years of exposure, yet every movement of the hands seemed to drag at something in the air, a subtle resistance, as if the room itself disapproved of this defiance. I should have walked away. Instead, I asked the shopkeeper about it when he finally emerged from behind a curtain. He gave me the kind of look you'd give a child asking about a dead pet, an odd mixture of pity and warning, and said only, "It's not for everyone." I half laughed, expecting some inflated price, but when I asked how much, he shrugged. "If you want it, take it. Just don't wind it." I told myself it was just another piece of eccentric superstition and carried it home through the drizzle, its weight oddly unbalanced in my arms. The first night, I hung it on the wall above my desk. I didn't mean to watch it, but my eyes kept finding their way to it between pages of work, like the backwards ticking was some faint pulse at the edge of hearing. I told myself it was just a quirk, a mechanical oddity. But the next morning, I noticed something that unsettled me far more than the motion of the hands. The coffee in my cup was hot again. Steam curled lazily upward, though I could have sworn I'd finished it an hour earlier. The clock ticked softly behind me, steady and reversed, and somewhere deep inside, a thought I didn't want to examine too closely began to take shape. Maybe it wasn't just moving backwards. Maybe it was taking me with it. I tried to dismiss it as coincidence. Maybe I'd absent-mindedly poured myself a second cup and forgotten. Maybe the morning haze in my head was just making me misremember, but when I glanced at the clock, the hands had shifted in their relentless backward crawl, and a faint chill passed over me. Not the kind that prickles your skin, but something deeper, like the cold of a room where the windows haven't been opened in decades. The rest of the day was filled with small, almost imperceptible dissonances. The bruise on my knuckle from bumping it the day before was paler by evening. A text message I could have sworn I sent at lunch was no longer in my phone's history, though the thought of writing it still lingered in my mind, as if I'd done it. My reflection in the bathroom mirror seemed sharper somehow, as though I'd stepped back a year in the quality of my own skin without realizing it. That night, I sat in my desk chair and listened to the clock tick in reverse. Each click seemed to draw the air slightly inward, a breath taken but never released. I thought about what the shopkeeper had said, "Don't wind it," and wondered if he'd meant it literally or as some kind of warning, the way you tell a child not to press a certain button. I hadn't touched the winding key, yet the clock had run steadily since I'd brought it home. I went to bed late, but when I woke, the world outside the window felt off. The trees were bare, though I could have sworn their leaves were still clinging yesterday. My phone's lock screen showed a date in late March. I checked the calendar on my wall, March 29th, but it should have been April 3rd. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? My clock is moving backward and taking time with it, Sounds like a bad joke, not a confession. Still, I found myself watching it more and more. The backwards dance of the hands hypnotic, almost comforting. It wasn't until the third morning that I understood the pattern. The day before yesterday, I'd had an argument with a colleague. Something petty, stupid. The kind of thing that festers at the back of your mind. This morning, I remembered starting the disagreement, but not finishing it. In fact, I remembered us laughing together, as if nothing had happened at all. It wasn't just erasing days, it was erasing mistakes. By the end of the week, I stopped dreading its movement. I began to wonder, quietly, privately, how far back it could take me, how many choices it could undo, how many things I could have said differently. The temptation grew heavier every time I heard that soft, deliberate click behind me. And somewhere inside, a voice I didn't recognize began whispering that the shopkeeper had been wrong. Maybe it was for me. I began to test it. At first, the changes were small, almost cautious. If I stayed in the apartment and did nothing of consequence, I would wake to find the clock had shaved off a few hours from the world outside. Just enough that the light through my curtains seemed different. That yesterday's headlines were absent from the news. I started leaving myself notes, short sentences scribbled before bed so I could compare them in the morning. Some were gone entirely, others rewritten in handwriting that was undeniably mine but carried a slightly different slant, as though written by a version of me who had felt something else in that moment. The more I observed, the more I realized the clock's reach wasn't limited to time. It reshaped the spaces around me in subtle, disquieting ways. The paint on my kitchen wall, chipped for as long as I could remember, was suddenly smooth. A photo of me and my father, taken on my 13th birthday, hung at a slightly different angle, and in this version, we were both smiling, though I remembered his silence that day. The warmth in his eyes in the photo was something I had never truly seen. It should have comforted me. Instead, it left me hollow. Days continued to unwind, erasing their own trails. A missed deadline at work vanished, the email never sent. A bill I'd forgotten to pay was suddenly weeks away from its due date again. People began to speak to me with a strange warmth, as if the grievances they'd once carried against me had dissolved. And yet, in their eyes, I sometimes caught a flicker of hesitation, like they were remembering something that wasn't there anymore. Then came the night I dreamed of my mother. She had been gone for 12 years, but in the dream, she was only just older than I was now. She was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping tea, her voice low and warm, telling me to let the days go. I woke with the echo of her words in my head and the metallic scent of her perfume in the air. The clock was ticking backwards, steady and patient, as though it had been waiting for me to notice something. I checked my phone. The date was 3 years earlier than it should have been. The shock was numbing at first. My apartment looked subtly different. Fewer books on the shelf, a coat I'd thrown away years ago hanging by the door. The world outside my window was the same street, but younger somehow. The tree by the curb was shorter, its branches not yet twisted into their familiar shapes. I didn't go to work that day. Instead, I sat in front of the clock, watching the hands retreat. I tried to calculate how long it would take to reach what? The point before certain regrets, before certain losses. The idea rooted itself in me, warm and poisonous. That evening, I found the winding key. It was small, brass, and cold against my skin. The shopkeeper's voice came back to me. Don't wind it. But it felt less like a warning now, and more like an invitation I had finally earned the right to accept. When I fitted the key into place and turned it, the click was softer than I expected, almost relieved. The clock began to move faster. The change was immediate. The ticking grew quicker, each backward step sharper, more insistent. as if the clock had been holding itself back all this time. The air in the apartment thickened, the way it feels before a thunderstorm, when the atmosphere hums with pressure you can't quite name. Shadows in the corners seemed to lengthen, not because the light had changed, but because the moments themselves were slipping away faster than I could follow. I sat and watched the hands retreat through the hours. Afternoon melted into morning. Morning collapsed into night. Out the window, I saw the streetlights flicker, then vanish entirely, leaving a darker version of the street I knew. A street with fewer buildings, older signs, different cars. It wasn't just the world outside. The apartment around me was shedding layers of itself. The armchair by the window disappeared between one blink and the next, replaced by the battered recliner I'd thrown away years ago. The photograph of me and my father shifted again. This time we were younger still, his hair untouched by gray, my shoulders narrow and boyish. The warmth in his face was still there, but now it felt heavier, like it belonged to a moment I'd forgotten to cherish. Time bled away in great swaths. I could feel it in my body. Not pain exactly, but a strange loosening in my mind, as if memories were slipping out through cracks I hadn't known existed. Names came slower. Street routes I could once trace from memory now felt unfamiliar. I knew I was going backward, and yet there was no fear in it, only an ever-growing pull toward some undefined point. At one point, I caught my reflection in the window. My face was leaner, the lines at my eyes softened into nothing, but it wasn't just youth returning. It was absence. I couldn't remember the last time I'd thought about the job I once hated, the arguments that had once kept me awake, the losses that had left me hollow. All of it was gone. And without them, I wasn't sure who I was. The clock kept going, faster now. Days fell away like pages torn from a book, and the outside world transformed with unnerving fluidity. The skyline in the distance shrank. The old elm tree by the curb turned into a sapling, then into nothing but a dark mound of soil. My apartment's walls changed color, texture, once painted, then wallpapered, then bare plaster. Then one evening, if you could call it evening, when the concept of days had started to dissolve, I heard it. A faint, slow sound beneath the ticking, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to me. It came from the clock itself, resonating in the wood, in the glass, in the very air. And with it came a whisper of recognition. This was not the past I was moving into. This was something older. The room was smaller now, not because the walls had closed in, but because the years had. Furniture was sparse, the air colder, sharper, carrying the faint scent of raw timber and damp earth. Outside the window, there was no street, only a stretch of empty land under a sky without the glow of city lights. I knew then there would be a point, a moment, where there was nothing left of me to go back to. And still, I let the clock run. The moment came without ceremony. The hands slowed, the steady reverse tick softening into something almost tender. The air had grown so still that I could hear my own pulse, though it felt strangely out of sync with the rhythm of the clock. Outside, the land was stripped bare. No buildings, no trees, only a pale, endless expanse under a washed-out sky. I stood, but the room moved with me, its edges hazy, fragile, as if it were only an idea of a room. The walls were raw timber again, the floor cold beneath my feet. The air carried that deep, mineral scent of untouched earth, the way it smells inside a cave. The window no longer showed any horizon, only a dull, gray glow, like the world was lit from inside a shell. The clock's face had changed. There were no numbers now, only an empty dial and a reflection of me that didn't quite match. My double was younger, yes, but also different. His eyes held none of the weight I'd carried for years. No grief, no regrets, no knowledge of what had been lost. I understood then. This was where the clock had been leading me, not to a moment in my life, but to the point before my life began. The heartbeat I'd heard before was louder now, filling the space, resonating in my chest until I could no longer tell if it was mine. I reached for the clock, not to stop it, but to feel the vibration through the glass. It was warm, alive. I thought about everything I'd left behind. Not just the mistakes, but the love, the laughter, the quiet mornings that had made all of it bearable. They were gone. Not erased, but as if they'd never been. And in their place was this possibility, a clean slate. But standing there, I realized the cost. To go back this far was to undo not just the pain, but the person who had survived it. I could step through, and someone else, someone unformed, would wake in my place. Or I could let the clock wind down, accept the forward march again, carry what remained of myself into whatever time was left. The ticking slowed to a single, drawn-out beat. I didn't know if I had seconds or centuries to decide. And then, without fully understanding why, I stepped back from the clock. The hands shivered, hesitated, and began to move forward. The world outside flickered like a film reel catching speed. Walls painted themselves, trees grew and shed their leaves, buildings rose and aged in fast succession. My body ached with the weight of years returning all at once, memories slamming back into place, bright, painful, beloved. When it stopped, I was in my apartment again. The air was still. The clock sat on the shelf, silent, its face blank as if nothing had ever marked the hours. I haven't touched it since. But sometimes, at night, when the world is quiet enough, I think I hear it breathing, and I know it's only waiting for me to change my mind.